Hey everyone, today I wanted to talk about a little bit of a sour topic, but one that doesn't necessarily surprise me to finally be able to talk about, and that is the fact that basically Wild Hearts is officially dead. And not only did EA kill it, but realistically speaking, I don't think EA gave it very much of a good chance to actually succeed. The reason why I wanted to talk about this is because, of course, if you might have been paying attention, Wild Hearts is officially making its way into Game Pass on November 9th. I don't know when this video is going to be going live. Hopefully, I'm going to try to make it go live on that day, or at the very least the day prior. But ultimately, Wild Hearts, from EA's perspective, is basically being sent off to die. Now, usually when you hear of a game going into Game Pass is usually a good thing, mostly when it's day and date based on launch. If the game is launching and that very same day is going to Game Pass, then that's usually seen as a very good thing. However, when it comes to EA games that have been out for a bit and they essentially almost a year later, kind of like the FIFAs of the world, the Maddens, when they've been out for about a year or so and they eventually make their way into Game Pass, it's not necessarily seen as one of those things. It's just them dumping their old games in there so people can kind of just play them and hopefully give them microtransaction money or whatever the case is. And Wild Hearts finally seems to be reaching at that point on November 9th. But before we get any further ahead, I do want to specifically kind of talk about just the sad demise of Wild Hearts as a whole, because there's a lot of things that transpired around September or so that I'm not necessarily sure a lot of people got to cover. But around September 21st, they put out pretty much the last tweet in their official Wild Hearts Twitter account. As of right now, of course, they could tweet in the future or something along those lines, but as of right now, basically around September 21st, which at the time of this video going live is over a month and a half since then, basically them talking about the latest patch and presumably the last patch that they put out. I'm going to be leaving a link in the description below to their blog update where they basically talked about a couple of bug fixes and things of that nature, but that was pretty much the last thing that they mentioned regarding Wild Hearts. They did say at the back end that they would basically keep some maintenance going for Wild Hearts to ensure the game will keep running smoothly in the single player or multiplayer modes, but they didn't mention anything about the addition of new content or anything along those lines. Soon after that, we began to see articles mention that EA could be ending the support for Wild Hearts. Link in the description below for a couple of those articles where Game Rant specifically just kind of put the kibosh on the whole thing, where basically EA was confirming that support for the game, pretty much as support as in new content, not necessarily just keeping the servers alive, but just new content in general, would be ceasing going forward. And it's one of those things where, like, it doesn't surprise me from EA's perspective to actually kill off the game. I just don't necessarily see it as a very good idea, especially when EA as a company has such a limited portfolio of games. They have certainly some indie support where they put out an indie game once a year or so, or something along those lines with smaller EA Originals tag, but aside from that, they don't seem to be doing much of like mid-tier titles, which Wild Hearts certainly filled in that void. When you hear a lot of people talk about AAA games or something along those lines, then there's single A games and then there's B tier games, and Wild Hearts certainly seemed like a game that Koei Tecmo, which were of course the original developers, but EA ultimately were the ones publishing the game, and they seem to be the ones that kind of killed off this game and didn't basically give the money to Koei Tecmo, or at the very least the other way around, to be able to support it long term. And there's no real explanation for that. Neither Koei Tecmo has come out and said regarding what was the reasoning behind that, and EA just basically made it clear that support will no longer be active for the game, again, other than servers staying live and maybe a patch or two here or there if there's some sort of, like, I guess, cheating going on or bugs that need to be fixed. But other than that, new content will not be seen. Now, let's contextualize this a little bit further. Koei Tecmo originally, around the time of the game's launch, did mention that the game was doing extremely well in their eyes, But then fast forward to a couple of months, and you saw in the EA fiscal report that, you know, they basically didn't even mention Wild Hearts at the end of the day. Their fiscal report had no mention of the game whatsoever, which means that they didn't even view it as a profit or a loss. It was just kind of just there. It wasn't really something that they ever touted. Usually these companies, you'll see Square Enix do this, you'll see Capcom do this, some of the major third party, not Microsoft, not Sony, not Nintendo, but some of the major publishers will tout the sales for a game, certainly when it does well, and Wild Hearts never came close to that. They never even spoke about it sales-wise, other than Koei Tecmo mentioning originally around the launch period that it was doing well. So if you were to take away just how many actual purchases were done of Wild Hearts, maybe if it reached 1 million, it would be considered a success, but even that they would have mentioned, and it doesn't seem to have been the case. Then you have the situation now that almost a year later, the game is making its way into, of course, Game Pass. Now, this isn't for them to revive the game or anything along those lines. I do want to make that very clear. This is basically a business deal that EA has with Microsoft, where they essentially put their old games, their old catalog games, like I mentioned before. You're not going to be able to play like the latest FIFA 24 or Madden 24 or NHL 24 on EA Game Pass as of right now. Once the seasons are over for those different sports, then they'll add them into Game Pass, usually around 10 to 11 to 12 months after the original launch of the game. You see those games making their way into Game Pass. So that is exactly what is happening with Wild Hearts this time around. The game is basically a legacy title in EA's eyes, and because they are not supporting it, they're not funding any more actual new content for it, they're gonna basically sunset it onto Game Pass. If you want to play it, you absolutely can, but it will be basically phased out from any new support. Now, that at the very least is the reasoning that EA seems to be giving, but ultimately I do want to know what you guys think regarding Wild Hearts, because I personally pushed the game basically from the moment that it was announced. Any sort of Monster Hunter competition or any game that is trying to go up against Monster Hunter, I certainly hope that they do well, not because I want them to take down Capcom or by any means, but I want there to be more of these type of games because I'm a big fan of them. That's why I talk about Monster Hunter all the time. And I liked Wild Hearts for what it was. I just think it was, you know, not necessarily, it wasn't a perfect experience, but it was the first, you know, the first game in that franchise. So it doesn't surprise me that, you know, they had some issues there from the onset. However, for Koei to go ahead and back out and ultimately EA to stop supporting the game through basically post-launch support or anything along those lines speaks volumes to just not only basically them running away from the game, and EA has a track record of this with like games like Anthem, for example, which of course is unmitigated disaster, and we know that, and I'm not saying Wild Hearts was that, but it certainly just lost support instantly. And at the end of the day, it just goes to show, to speak the, I guess, to the power of Monster Hunter, because we see games like Monster Hunter now, which again, it's an extremely divisive game. I've talked about it in a negative fashion in many videos. I've had a lot of people come after me, but also a lot of people praise for the fact that I'm actually being critical of the game, and I'm not just a blind Monster Hunter fanboy, but instead I'm being critical and at least looking at it through a prism of just not fandom, but just hoping for things to be better, although that is Niantic's issue to solve, not necessarily Capcom's. And you know, at the end of the day, you would love to see more of those games come to fruition and the fold, but just the kind of stranglehold that Monster Hunter has on this specific type of gameplay, that other games might come alongside it and try to like reach it with Wild Hearts and not even come close, or instantly lose support along the way, and that is just a bummer to see. But at the same time, it doesn't surprise me. Now, I hope I'm going to be talking in the future about another one of these similar games, Instinction. I hope you guys have looked up at the very least a trailer or so. In a few days, I'm going to be trying to get a video out for Instinction, which is another Monster Hunter type game that is being worked on right now. It's mostly a PC experience. It's a little bit different because it has guns and all of that, but it just goes to speak that the idea isn't dead. Certainly some developers are willing to take that chance, but if the player base isn't there, if the support isn't there, if the money isn't there, then there's really nothing else they can do. And if a big publisher gets involved with it, which was always an interesting situation with Wild Hearts being a Koei Tecmo game and EA supporting it as a publisher. Koei Tecmo can publish their own games. They don't need the support of a big company, but they went after specifically EA, or at the very least a big Western publisher, because they wanted to get Western support and know-how to be able to publish the game and get all the support that they could. And EA failed them miserably. I don't think this game did very well heading into launch because of the way EA was talking about it, even confusing players, talking about the fact that it wouldn't have like paid DLC, but then they afterwards, I believe maybe a few months later, they said that they would see based on the game's performance. You just never want to say that. You just don't want to give wishy-washy responses. You just want to say there's no paid DLC, period, and the story, and that's that. But instead, they kind of backed away because they saw some people be happy about that, and they like thought they could potentially capitalize it. And now you see a year later, they basically sunset the game, and it's going to be put out to die on Game Pass, because I just don't see a lot of people playing it. They're not going to be reviving the game by any means. There'll be a lot of people talking about it on Twitter, on social media, on Facebook and all of that, saying, hey, it's a fun game. But they didn't pay for it because they're paying for the subscription. So, it's not like EA's pocketing $60 in their pocket and, Koei Tecmo is getting a chunk of that. It's just too late for that. So at the end of the day, it could have been a much better game, yes, but it's sad to see that not only support officially has ended, EA will not be doing much with it, and Koei Tecmo is left to pick up the pieces, basically, to restart, try to do something again, and which this is now their second type of attempt for this type of game, and it's failed. It just hasn't delivered, and it's a shame to see. But again, ultimately, it goes to speak to the fact that Monster Hunter is so massive, and the name recognition that it has is so big that a lot of games that are trying to come close to it just simply cannot. But that's about all I really want to talk about. I certainly want to hear your guys' opinions on this. This was more of an opinionated video for my part, since it's just sad to see what happened to Wild Hearts at the end of the day. And, I kind of wish it would have seen a bigger audience and more support, but ultimately, it just didn't do all that well, and it's sad to see. But if you're brand new to my channel, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Hit the bell to receive notifications when the videos go up. And as always, thank you so much for watching. See ya.